So it's a new tie today.
Yeah, I can see you.
Hmm. It's a new tie that you're wearing, a new necktie. Are they
Sorry,
plain?
I can't hear you very well.
Yeah,
Can you hear me?
yeah, this is perfect. I can hear you and see you.
So, Nivedita, we were discussing last time about the Mukti Bahini and the strategy of the 1971 war.
Right.
Uh, and I'd covered some aspects of the naval actions that had taken place.
Hmm.
I will now cover the military aspects.
Okay.
Now, as far as the East Pakistan is concerned, India had set a deadline for starting the operations of the 3rd of December, 1971. But what happened was that since the Mukti Bahini had already gone into East Pakistan and some of our officers and leaders with them, a number of actions were already taking place in East Bengal right since March, April of 1971. Now, Pakistan wanted to take some offensive action. And they had a squadron of Shafi tanks, which is a small American tank, which was located in the southwestern corner of Bangladesh, opposite the border of which comes towards Calcutta. And some conflict took place there. And I think some of our heavier tanks were present there. And a firefight took place. And so the opening salvos of the war, shall I call it, took place about the last week of November rather than the 3rd of December. Second thing that happened was that as far as the army in the West was concerned, where we had all come to our concentration areas, we were told that we'd have to be prepared for war by between 3rd and 6th of December. But on the 3rd of December, because that some conflict had taken place in East Pakistan, the Pakistan Air Force crossed the borders in 4 or 5 places in the West and made a number of air attacks against some of our airfields in other places. Adhampur in Punjab, Suratgarh in Punjab, and Handwara near Delhi. Because of the air battle started off then itself. I had an interesting experience there because we had moved the armor division very secretly, shall I say.
Okay.
We pretended we were going towards the Amritsar border near Wagah, but actually we didn't go there. We put up the various signs on the roads that to indicate as to where the division would be located. And so the signposting was done. But the division actually went to southern Punjab, to the Muksar Malot area, which is near in the area of Bhatinda, Firozpur, that area. Southern Punjab. Idea here was to try and confuse Pakistani intelligence as to where we were.
Okay.
Now our organization for defense in the West was that we had a corps headquarters called 11 Corps, commanded by Lieutenant General Naveen Rawley, who had later become the Vice Chief of Army Staff, but at that time he was commanding a corps. And he had his headquarters near Jalandhar. But he had an advanced headquarters on the southern side because it's a very big sector. So we had the Sutlej River in between, and north of it in the Jalandhar sector was his main headquarters. And at a place called Kot Kapura, which is on the southern side opposite Firozpur, there was his advanced headquarters. So the headquarters was split in two parts. Now that, as you know, is not a very happy way of doing things. I don't think the government of India had enough money perhaps to raise another corps for the southern Punjab. That was what the requirement was. Or perhaps it didn't have the desire to increase the military headquarters. But this arrangement was not very good. Now we, Armored Division had come into this sector. We sent our tanks by train, fully camouflaged and covered with tarpaulins and things like that. And we moved the rest of the division by road. Took us 2-3 days to move into our concentration areas in the Muxar Malot sector in southern Punjab. And we considered that we had arrived in that area and were very secretly located so that the Pakistan Air Force wouldn't know where we are. Now, in this business of secrecy, the question was that we ourselves in our communications, which are picked up by the enemy, should not locate our defenses. And I must give it to General Officer Commanding, that is General Gurbachan Singh, Butch, Major General Butch. He said that the main reason that the position and location goes out is because we want to get communications between Jawans and officers and their wives left behind so that there's no alarm and despondency. But in this communication, the first question and all the ladies will ask is, where are you? And as a Jawan answers, well, Pakistan intelligence had picked that up. So he went around before we left Jhansi, Babina area where the division was located to explain to all the ladies and wives, daughters, and elder sons that to maintain secrecy of the location of where the armored division is going, it is necessary for them to not allow themselves or the man with whom they would communicate to say anything about their location. Neither ask the question nor be ready to hear it. This I thought was a very interesting way of bringing the wives and families into the business of military confidentiality. And the result was that after we reached our new locations, we got very good communications in the military. So we were allowed our men and officers to talk to their wives every now and then whenever they wished. But nobody was allowed to mention where they are, and no lady ever asked a question. Nonetheless, I think the Pakistani intelligence has a very good idea of where we were. We were very well camouflaged. And when this air attack took place on the 3rd of December, they came over our sector. They could not locate us because we were all camouflaged and concealed. And so we had no damages there. But I, as the Colonel GS, wanted to do some reconnaissance of the various areas of this place. I had been there in the 65 war, so I knew a good lot of the area between Firozpur and Fazilka and slightly south of it up to Suratkar. But areas further south I did not know. The wide open desert, northern Rajasthan. So I had taken from Faridkot airfield, we had a small airfield in Faridkot. Faridkot is slightly set back from the border. Firozpur is on the border, with Pakistan. And then Fazilka is also near the border of Pakistan further south. And the Indira Gandhi canals go in that area. So in Firozpur, we had an air landing ground where small aeroplanes could land. And we had an air observation flight. You know what air observation is? That when you want to bring artillery fire onto the enemy, you need somebody to observe as to where the shells are landing so that they could control the guns in their firing to get onto the target. So to have an elevated observation post, to have an aircraft which goes up and he can see better. So then he controls that 35. These are aerope aircraft, they're under our control, they were under my control. So I asked one of the aerope pilots to take me for this reconnaissance, which he did. On the 3rd, we took off early in the morning and we were out for about 2 hours to the southern side of the Rajasthan, of Punjab and the northern Rajasthan area to examine the type of terrain, obstacles, and where the canal systems were going, etc. So these are all relevant to the defense of the area. I landed back, I think at about 12 o'clock in the afternoon at the airfield, and I had my jeep waiting for me, so I went back to my headquarters. But meanwhile, the Pakistani air attack had already taken place. On their way back, these Pakistani aircraft saw this little plane standing all by itself on the airfield. It's a Krishak aircraft. It's a single monoplane with a small engine. And they had a good set of machine guns fired at it. So it's got a few holes in it. But there were no casualties as such. And meanwhile, General Butch, since I was not there, he had moved the headquarters completely. So I had to search for my own headquarters as to where they had gone. We found they changed locations because of the Pakistan attack. And very well camouflaged again, and anti-aircraft guns ready to fire at Pakistani aircraft. That was the opening salvos on the western side because of the Pakistan air attack. Now we heard on Pakistan radio that the Pakistan Air Force people claimed a large number of kills of Indian aircraft and bombing up the Indian airfields and also killing a number of human beings and soldiers and all that sort of thing. But really speaking, we had none of those damages, which goes to show that the reports that are given to their country by pilots or others are a little exaggerated. It happens on both sides, I suppose, but they're exaggerated. The casualties we had were very few. None of our aircraft were hit on the ground, but the reports were by the Pakistani Air Force that they had achieved a lot of good results for this attack. So really speaking, the war was started by Pakistan because of the air attack. And I must explain this point to you a little earlier. You know, the 1965 war, we were surprised by the Pakistani attack and we had to resolve how to handle it. 1947 earlier, again it was a surprise. We didn't know that the Pakistanis were entering Kashmir. We had to react at the last minute. But in the 1971 war, we had planned the attack on East Pakistan and the defense of West Pakistan. So we were well prepared for battle, very well prepared. Because as I told you last time, we had about 6 or 7 months to prepare and we did that very well. So there was no question of being caught napping, as they say. On the western side, the best form of defense being attacked, as I explained earlier, the Indian strategy was that from Samba again, like we did in 1965, the one corps would attack south into what is known as the Shakargarh salient, which was done by General K.K. Singh. And here we had a lot of tank actions, very large tank actions, south of Samba, which went into the Pakistani area. Pakistan also had a large number of tanks. They had an extra armored division, as I told you earlier, and they had a good tank fight there. We could not advance very much, about 10, 12 kilometers at the max. When I questioned some of the senior officers about this, that we had the initiative of attack, so why is it that we didn't progress too much? Well, what we were told is that Pakistani had laid very long minefields and things through which we had to go. And then they had enough tanks and infantry to hold our advance, which they did. So with the result, it came to a stalemate after a few days there. In other words, when two armies are more or less equally matched, you can't expect large amounts of terrain being captured. That is the theory of the best. As far as the Lahore sector was concerned, where I was the Colonel GS, we assisted various infantry formations. There was a infantry division, 7 infantry division, for instance, which was commanded by a chap called Major General Fremantle, who later, after retirement, went off to Australia. He was commanding, but again, in this area of command, he had one brigade looking after the Firozpur area, the town itself, when there's a bridge, huge bridge, crossing the Satluj River. It's a rail come road bridge. And on the other side of the bridge, we have an enclave on our side, which is really called the Bhagat Singh Shrine.
Okay.
If you recollect the history of struggle for independence, in the middle 1920s and early 30s, there used to be a lot of, besides Mahatma Gandhi's peaceful movements, there was a lot of terrorist action against the British. And some of those people were Mr. Bhagat Singh and 2, 3 others whom you know about, who used to take on the British officers. For instance, some of them were trying to kill General Dyer, who was a Jallianwala Bagh man who slaughtered a lot of Sikhs in Jallianwala Bagh in 1919. So anyway, these people were eventually caught, 3 of them, and they were hanged by the British. But on the enclave on the west of Firozpur, across the river where this bridge was the Bhagat Singh Shrine, because that is where the memorial was. And so we had a battalion of infantry over there. It's a very good battalion. It was known as the 15 Punjab or 15 Sikhs, I'm not sure. But it was from the Patiala forces. It was the first Patiala under the Maharajah Patiala earlier, before state forces joined the Indian Army. And they were considered a very stalwart defense, and they were doing the defense of the Bhagat Singh Shrine. Now, what we found when the Armored Division arrived there is that the people near the border, protecting the border, and who are actually in the frontline defense, did not expect any war, because they were in contact with the Pakistan border guards, who appeared to be very frightened and said, "You Indian army is collected here, and we want to save our wives and children. So if you're going to attack us, please give us a warning so that we'll get these families out of the way," and all that sort of thing. Now we got very suspicious of that. And now I, for instance, when I was looking at the various intelligence documents, I noticed that the Pakistanis had a brigade opposite this Bhagat Singh Shrine, opposite Firozpur, on the other side of the river, commanded by a Brigadier Fazle Haq. Now, Brigadier Fazle Haq of the Pakistan Army was a colleague and friend of mine from the RIC. In fact, from the age of 11 to 1946 or 47, when they left for Pakistan, we were together in the same class in RIC. So I knew him very well. And I checked up his details on the intelligence report of India, and he just said that here is the Brigadier Fazle Haq, he's done the staff college on so-and-so time, and he's taken over this brigade on so-and-so time, and that's about all. So I filled up my views on this officer, and I said he's a very, very aggressive commander. He doesn't think about anything. If he's got a task to do, he just goes ahead and does it with full vim and vigor. So I said, we have to be careful of the Bhagat Singh Shrine, which is opposite this Firozpur town, and this huge bridge which was on our side. So nobody was very convinced, and I told my General Gurbachan Singh, I said, I'm concerned about Firozpur, because if Fazle Haq on the other side, moment the balloon goes up, he'll attack with surprise. So we had about 3 tank battalions and 2 infantry regiments, 2 infantry battalions. And so he had, and plus some gunners, and so he had a very good force. And so the Vice Chief of Army Staff, General Harprasad, visited us before this conflict started. And he's my old commanding officer from 16 Cavalry when I joined as a second lieutenant. So General Booth said, this Dick Sharma wants to talk to you. So he said, yes, what's the problem? I said, this is the problem. We have to be careful because first day Haq is on the other side. So General Harprasad, General HP as we call him, he said, don't be silly, this is one of our best battalions of the Indian Army.
Yeah.
And they can thrash anyone. Each man is 6 foot tall. So I said, I've gone and visited them right up to Firozpur front line. And they're all very easy. They say no war can take place because we are too strong. And these Pakistani border guards and others are so frightened of us. I wanted to meet some officer. There was no officer present there. They'd all gone for some discussion to the other side of the Sadlej where the div headquarters was, near Khemkaran. And then I wanted to speak to some JSO. They said, no, the Subedar Major Sahab is retiring. So there's a party in Firozpur for him. And so all the JSOs have gone there. So the only people I could talk to was an odd Havildar, all not even dressed in uniform, relaxing. So I said, look, there may be an attack. My friend Fazle Haq is on the opposite side. So you better be careful. They no, don't be worried. These chaps are all frightened. Nothing could be. So I got a little concerned about this. I went across the bridge and I found that the engineers, the sappers, were laying charges on the bridge to blow it up in case of necessity. I spoke to this officer. He was a major from the engineers. And I said, what are your orders? He said, I'll put the charges. How long will it take? He said, well, I think one span. The bridge had about 7 spans. He says, one span we'll be able to do. That's the nearest one to our bank of the Satluj. In another 2 days. And then I'll try and do the rest. I said, what happens if the war starts and the Pakistanis start coming across this bridge? Because they've got an armored brigade on the other side. He said, then I've been ordered to blow the bridge, provided the brigade commander at Firozpur, who's part of the 7th Division, gives me the orders. So I said, he gives me the code word. So I said, supposing that brigade commander is not available to give you the code word, then what do you do? He said, then I can't blow the bridge. I said, then the Pakistani tanks will come across. So I just wanted to show this particular incident because there's a lot of confusion in war. And many times we lay down certain tasks that you can only blow the bridge when you receive the code word such and such from the brigade commander. But when I went to the brigade headquarters in Firozpur, I found that brigade commander had been absent for 2-3 days. He was on the other side of the Satluj for some discussions with his general officer commanding in the Khemkaran sector. I asked some staff officers, I said, do you know anything about this bridge and what happens if the war blows up tomorrow? They said, firstly, we don't think there's going to be any war. Secondly, don't worry, the brigade commander will be back in a day or so and he'll give the order the bridge will be blown. I got rather concerned because if the bridge goes into the hands of the enemy, then they can come across it with much larger forces and we will have a problem. And our armor division will have to be, instead of an offensive action, we'll have to get into a defensive mode. So I convinced this officer, the engineer officer with the bridge. I said, look, if you find enemy tanks coming across, shooting all guns, just blow the bridge, order or no order. He said, but these are my orders. I said, well, you've got to use your common sense now because in war, there's total confusion. Communication will go for a sec. You may not get the answer. You've got to use your own wits. But don't let us down on this. So he said, all right, I'll do it. And I'm very happy to say that he did do that when the war started. So why I'm giving some detail about this is that I find that here an armored division has come all the way from Jhansi and Babina, which is in UP, to the border. Why? Because we expect war. Why? Because we have already decided to go to war in East Pakistan, right? But the troops on the front line are not prepared because they are mentally not prepared. Now, this is a problem in many armies of the world, especially those who are hanging on to the border and they see the enemy across them also relaxing, you're also relaxing. You can't remain tense all the time.
Right.
So, with the result, efficiency goes down if you're tense all the time. So, everybody is relaxing. And then if the commanders think there'll be no war, then they're even more relaxed. Right. That means the government may think there's a war, but if the people down on the front lines are thinking, nahi, kuch nahi hoga, that doesn't work. Now we noticed this also when we went for a conference with the corps commander. He had come from northern Punjab, from the Jalandhar side, and he came to talk to all of us. And General Butch and I attended this conference. We we were wearing battle dress with our pistols and ready to go to battle, and our boots on, and no swagger canes and things. And normally an armored corps chap wears a black berry. We weren't wearing the black berries because we were incognito, so we were wearing infantry type of hat. And when we walked in for the conference, everybody was dressed with shining brass and swagger sticks and medals and all that sort of thing, and polished shoes. And they all started laughing when they saw General Butch and myself come in for the conference to say, "Oh, these chaps are ready for war." To them, it was a pride to show that they are relaxed. So when the corps commander came and started giving his talk, General Butch got up. He said, "Look, I've got a point. We have come all the way from Jhansi with the armor division here to go to war. But we find here, all of you who are commanding the frontline troops are so relaxed because you don't think there's going to be war. Unless you think in your head that you're going to go to war, you're not going to be ready for it." So my suggestion to you is that all of us should be dressed for battle. And so corps commander accepted that point, and he instructed all the other generals and others in the command that please get yourselves and your men ready for battle. Now in the armor division, because of the relaxation all around us, everybody was relaxed. So General Butch gave order that everybody will be fully dressed for battle. And even when you go to sleep on your bed or your camp cot or whatever it is, you will have your boots on. That means you sleep with your boots on. Because the first thing somebody does when he wants to relax, to go to bed, to take his boots off and sleep. But if you've got your boots on, you're ready for action straight away. The moment alarm is given, you jump out of your bed, pick up your weapon, and you're ready to go. So the lesson is that the relaxation goes more and more the closer you are to the front line. And therefore, the answer really is for all people to get fully alert. Another point, many infantry Javans and others right on the border, I noticed, were carrying their weapons. But their ammunition was separate in a pouch or something, not loaded. And I asked them, I said, look here, tomorrow the balloon may go up suddenly, may go up in the next 1 minute for all you know. And you've got an empty weapon. You have to take ammunition out of your pouch or whatever it is and load it inside there. So why don't you keep it loaded? Now, the reason why I'm giving this, it's a fault in most armies, and I found it a fault in our army also, not only for this war, but even later when we went into Sri Lanka when I was the army chief. The point is, people are trained in peacetime to be very careful of loading their weapons because of the question of killing somebody by chance. Because sometimes in the heat, bullet cooks off, you see, because of the heat. And if you're not properly alert, it might kill some human being, and there's a court martial and all that sort of thing. Even when you go for firing training, you are required to only load your gun on an order. And after you have done the field practice firing or whatever it is, then your every gun has to be discharged of all, cleaned out of all ammunition, and is inspected to make sure it's empty before you're allowed to pick up and leave the firing point. Now, this training and peacetime are not good for war. Once you go into conflict regions, men have to be trained to carry loaded weapons all the time, even sleep with loaded weapons. Even you load a weapon, you don't have to load the chamber where the ground may cook off. You load the gun with one cock and the bullet is in the chamber from the magazine. That's the way we need to train for battle. So that lesson was learned by the armor division when we went into the western sector. And we used to have discussions amongst our own officers, and even amongst our own officers, other brigade commanders and others, barring the general himself, myself, and one of the brigade commanders who said, yes, there will be war. Everybody said there'll be no war. Anyway, uh, when we went into East Pakistan, then naturally the war broke out. And Pakistan not only opened the conflict by crossing their aircraft across the border. On the western sector, I won't talk of much here because nothing very much happened. We went into certain areas of Pakistan, for especially in the Rajasthan desert, the northern Rajasthan. There was a railway line which connects near the Pakistan border in northern Rajasthan called Munabao. And we extended into that area. One of my friends, Lieutenant Colonel Bhavani Singh, who was the Maharaja of Jaipur, by the way, he was in 3rd Cavalry and he was very well. He was commanding a commando group of the 10 para commando. And they were on jeeps and they went almost about 100 kilometers into the Rajasthan desert across the Pakistan border. This place called Chachro or something, they went and attacked it and captured. There was some infantry also with them. So these are very good actions, but it didn't mean much in the overall context because, you know, the desert is a wide open space. It's very easy to cross. And there are odd posts here and there belonging to India or to Pakistan, and to capture them is not a big deal. But it does create a lot of alarm in the minds of the enemy when they realize that Indian troops have gone 100 kilometers into the border. This is the direction of Karachi. So to defend this desert area is not easy because they are wide open spaces. So they did it well. He got a Mahavir Chakra for his actions. So we had a fair amount of control of the Pakistan territory across the desert. And we also had in the Samba sector, the one corps went in, they went about 15, 20 kilometers inside Pakistan. And that is it. But on the eastern side, as far as East Pakistan is concerned, we had attacks from 4 corners of East Bengal. There was one of our corps, 2nd Corps, commanded by General T.P. Rena, who was the hero of the battle in 1962 in Ladakh, Chusul battle. He was the brigade commander there, who stood his ground against the Chinese attack. And though our army was not able to disappear from the scene in the east, in the Arunachal Pradesh side, the Kameng Frontier Division, in Ladakh, we put a much better show because people like General Rena were there. He was a brigadier at that time. He's commanding the corps. He advanced from Calcutta right up to the large rivers and captured the territory that he was supposed to capture. Now, the plan for East Pakistan was to not capture any big town, but to capture areas behind the towns and to cut off Dhaka, for instance, from its southern ports. Because Dhaka's trade and all the entrepreneurship of Bengal goes through Chittagong port. So if you cut it off, then that will cause problems with the functioning of East Pakistan. That is the army headquarters there. But what we noticed is that though many of the Pakistani troops fought very well, the fact is that when you get behind the enemy and you manage to succeed to go some distance there and attack from the rear also and from the front, and there is no support coming from the rear, then their defense becomes difficult. Though Pakistan had claimed that they would easily defend East Pakistan against the Indian attack, the fact was, and if I look at it this way, that when the people of the country are not supporting you, but supporting the enemy, then your defense becomes difficult. I do believe that an army only functions well provided the people of his country support the army. Now in Bangladesh, or not Bangladesh, it was East Pakistan then, the people were not supporting the army because of the rape and actions that were being taken, disastrous action against the Bengali people by the Pakistanis. So the common individual in East Pakistan was terribly against the army. When that happens, and we also had the Mukti Bahini, then little pinpricks take place behind the enemy lines. But there are one or two examples. For instance, by the time of the end of the war, we had captured 93,000 prisoners, starting with the lieutenant general going down to a Jawan. Now, to this figure of 93,000 is unheard of in battle. In fact, in World War II, only such surrender was the Japanese surrender, but it was much more. When the Japan surrendered after the atomic bomb was dropped on them, they surrendered their army all over Southeast Asia. So there were many more Japanese who surrendered by order of their king. That was a very large surrender. But after that, this is the only example in the world where 93,000 prisoners were taken by Indian army and they laid down their weapons, the unconditional surrender. Now, why did this happen? There are 2, 3 reasons. Firstly, some of the Indian commanders, despite their orders, were extremely brilliant and did certain actions which were not expected of them. One example is a person called, he was a Lieutenant General Sagat Singh. Now, he was commanding an area in Assam, and he was asked to take over control of 2 divisions and attack East Pakistan from the Tripura side. That's from the eastern side. So from between north of Tripura and Kachar district of Assam, to make a thrust towards the Meghna River. Now the Meghna River is a very large, massive, and the history is of course very clear as to what he did. But I'll just give you later, when I happened to be in that area, I was talking to an Air Force helicopter pilot who was flying me around when I was commanding the brigade in Mizoram. 2 years later, 1973, I'm talking of, 2 years after the war. And he had actually been the pilot flying General Sagat Singh around when he was the corps commander. And he said, I've never imagined how a man like this could function. The example is that there was a whole division which was to advance from Kachar district of Assam westwards into East Pakistan to contact the Meghna River, then to find out